That's great. Well, thank you, Neil. I want to thank the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, and how about a big round of applause for St. Anslem College? It's a very special place. It's great to be back in New Hampshire. I'm Mike Pence. I'm from Indiana, and I'm running for President of the United States of America. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I couldn't think of a better place to reflect on the future of our country and the future of the Republican Party than here in the first in the nation state of New Hampshire. And I appreciate you all making time, particularly the students who I hope are not skipping class to be here with us. I stand before you today as a Republican candidate for President of the United States because I believe this country is in a lot of trouble. Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. And I believe that all of us with the ability and the experience to bring about change have a responsibility to try. We also have an obligation to speak plainly about the challenges our nation is facing. We need new leadership in the White House, and I believe we need new leadership in the Republican Party. But now more than ever, I believe we must forge that new leadership in the Republican Party, grounded on the conservative principles that have defined our movement for more than 50 years. The truth is, we've come to a Republican time for choosing. You know, I've always believed in the greatness of America, and I will never apologize for believing that our best days are ahead. But having faith in our nation and in our people doesn't mean turning a blind eye to the challenges that American families are facing. That disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. Now war rages in Eastern Europe, and China continues its military provocations in the Asia-Pacific. Runaway government spending has triggered the worst inflation in 40 years. Mortgages at a 22-year high. 2 out of 3 American families are living paycheck to paycheck. The Biden administration's war on energy has driven up the cost of living for every American family. Gasoline prices are still 60% higher than they were the day we left office. And a flood of illegal immigration at our southern border, facilitated by the open border policies of the Biden administration, has created human suffering on both sides of the border. An avalanche of people and narcotics like fentanyl that are literally claiming lives every week here in New Hampshire and all across the nation. Our cities have descended into lawlessness. Our schools teach children to hate their own history. And even many of our public schools teach our kids that boys can become girls and girls can become boys. The President's promise to unite our people is all but abandoned. Under President Joe Biden, our streets are less safe. Our families are suffering. Our citizens are estranged. He looks us in the eye and tells us that none of it is true. He tells us that Bidenomics is working, but the American people know better. The truth is the Biden agenda and Bidenomics have failed the American people, and they know it. People of this country see what their president won't, or perhaps can't after 50 years in public office. Sky-high grocery prices, costs of gasoline and utilities, an overrun border, and heartbreaking obituaries in local papers, marking empty chairs at dinner tables. The American people are fed up. They're ready for new leadership. And the Republican Party must provide the American people with that new leadership in 2024. The question of the hour, then, is not just who, but what will we offer the American people a year from this November? So I came here to Anslem College to simply say from my heart that Republican voters face a choice in this state and in every state around the nation as these primaries unfold. And I believe that choice will determine the fate of our party and the course of our nation for years to come. So today I ask my fellow Republicans this. In the days to come, will we be the party of conservatism? Or will we follow the siren song of populism unmoored to conservative principles? The future of this movement and this party belongs to one or the other, not both. That's because the fundamental divide between these two factions is unbridgeable. History teaches that societies with more freedom and less government flourish. That's why we have a brilliant system of checks and balances, divisions of authority, co-equal branches of government, enshrined in our Constitution, and sovereign state governments under our system of federalism. Conservatives understand that in order to advance an agenda on behalf of the American people, we must work through the system. The political home of those who believe in limited government and individual liberty, who keep faith with our Constitution, is the Republican Party. Now, for decades, conservatism's ideological rival has been liberalism, an ideology that has long found favor in the Democratic Party. The radical left has now taken the Democratic Party into the abyss of progressive socialism in the guise of their woke agenda. Where conservatives view government power with great suspicion, progressives wield it eagerly in pursuit of their political goals, especially their massive avalanche of spending and mandates known as the Green New Deal. And when their goals are obstructed or delayed, liberal progressives undermine our institutions and are prepared to disregard the Constitution and even the laws of this country. Just this week, Senate Democrats actually attacked the Supreme Court of the United States again, demanding an investigation into Justice Samuel Alito, despite the fact that 3 liberal justices on the court have engaged in the exact same pattern of behavior that he has. And the attacks on our institutions with which they differ continues. You know, if Democrats didn't have double standards, they'd have no standards at all. But today, another strain of this ideology challenges conservatism, not from the Democratic Party, but from within, for control of the Republican Party. It takes the form of what's known as populism, rather than progressivism. But make no mistake about it. Those ideologies are fellow travelers on the same road to ruin. Now, populist movements have long been a part of the fabric of American politics. They've most often been led by Democrats like William Jennings Bryan, Huey Long, and more recently, Bernie Sanders, and other leftists who share the party's progressivism. But today, a populist movement is rising in the Republican Party. The growing faction would substitute our faith in limited government and traditional values with an agenda stitched together by little else than personal grievances and performative outrage. The Republican populists would abandon American leadership on the world stage, embracing a posture of appeasement in the face of rising threats to freedom. Republican populists would blatantly erode our constitutional norms. A leading candidate for the Republican nomination last year called for the, quote, termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, close quote. While his imitators in this primary have demonstrated a willingness to brandish government power to impose their will on opponents. And even after a historic victory for life, Republican populists would relegate the cause of protecting the unborn to the states, much in the way during another time in the life of our nation. Those who sought to preserve a great evil tried to leave that question to the states alone. Populist Republicans would have us trade in our time-honored principles for passing public opinion. That's not a trade I'm willing to make, and nor should my fellow conservatives here in New Hampshire or anywhere in America. You know, there's already a party that embraces appeasement abroad. There's already a party that would ignore our national debt. There's already a party that wants to marginalize the right to life. So I stand before you today and I say with great humility, I am the most qualified, the most consistent, and the most proven conservative in this race. And I believe, for the sake of our party and our country, that we must advance a strong national defense, limited government, and traditional values, and those principles must guide our party and our nation as much today as they have for the past 50 years. Should the new populism of the right seize and guide our party, the Republican Party we've long known will cease to exist, and the fate of American freedom would be in doubt. Look, I understand the frustration that's led to populist movements on the left and the right. Government institutions have failed us and broken our trust and evaded accountability over and over. Globalization, a rising knowledge economy, increasing automation have created incredible income and inequality of opportunity among Americans. Entire regions of the country, including places back home in Indiana, have been left behind, while no part of America has been spared the deadly epidemic of addiction in this country. And too often Americans who hold traditional views of family and faith are mocked in our popular culture, or even by their leaders for how they worship, how they live, how they make a living. Raising concerns about unchecked illegal immigration is often deemed racist. A reluctance to redefine gender or use the appropriate pronouns, according to some, is supposedly evidence of hatred in one's heart and intolerance. You know, I've stood on the streets of once prosperous Midwestern towns in my home state, where entire factories were shuttered when jobs were shipped overseas. I've sat in town halls next to grieving parents and across kitchen tables to hear about the extraordinary loss and suffering from opioid abuse and addiction. And in defense of religious liberty, I've been a target of the woke brigades myself. The populist wing of our party is right in its efforts to address these concerns, but their means of doing so are wrong. Rejecting free market principles, the principles of limited government, will not create new prosperity or revive suffering communities. Increasing economic freedom will bring America back. And using government edicts to cancel those we disagree with will not protect traditional values. Making our case to the American people and removing left-wing radicals from office will. You know, I believe that being conservative means standing your ground and holding true to your principles. Not just doing what's easy or what's popular in any given moment, or offering simple solutions to difficult challenges the American people are facing. The American people are facing serious challenges today, and they require serious solutions and leadership fitted to the times. You know, with the exception of the former president, no other candidate in this race knows better or takes more pride in the accomplishments of the Trump-Pence administration than I do. I was there. Together we rebuilt our military. We revived our economy. We achieved energy independence for the first time in 75 years. We secured our border and gave the American people a new beginning for the right to life. We got government out of the way. We governed as conservatives. And the American people thrived in those days before that worse in a century pandemic struck our nation. It's really no mystery why we accomplished these things. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, he promised to govern as a conservative. And together we did. But it's important for Republicans to know that he and his imitators in this Republican primary make no such promise today. It seems like they forget that we succeeded because of a conservative agenda, not in spite of it. I mean, the truth is, Donald Trump, along with his imitators, often sound like an echo of the progressives they seek to replace than a choice for the American people. For instance, they argue that we can only end our crises at home by abandoning our allies abroad. Like progressives, Republican populists insist government should dictate how private businesses operate. And in fact, the governor of Florida still justifies using the power of the state to punish a corporation for taking a political stand that he disagreed with. And one of the president's populist protégés actually advocated a 59% inheritance tax in his book, Nation of Victims, last year, saying that Americans should not become wealthy, quote, just by having rich parents. That's liberal redistributionist thinking, not conservatism. And maybe worst of all, Republican populists deny the coming debt crisis facing our children and grandchildren. Today we have a national debt the size of our nation's economy for the first time since World War II. And just this week, the Biden administration confirmed that the deficit this year will double from $1 trillion to $2 trillion, almost overnight. Now, the biggest drivers of government spending now and in the future are New Deal and Great Society programs, entitlements, Social Security and Medicare. But on that debt crisis, President Joe Biden's policy is insolvency. He won't even talk about common sense and compassionate reforms to the entitlements that threaten the very vitality of the economy that these young people will inherit. And frankly, Donald Trump's position on entitlement reform is identical to Joe Biden's. One other candidate for the Republican nomination actually said that presidents can't do everything. So if he became president, he would leave to the next president the challenge to reform entitlements. Well, I got a news flash for anybody running for president. I've been in the West Wing. I've been in the hallway. I've been in the room. Presidents actually have to do everything, especially provide leadership to meet the crises facing the American people. The truth is, these policies at home and abroad are not conservatism. It's republicanism that prioritizes power over principle. Now, anyone who knows a little bit about my background knows that I started out in politics as a Democrat. But when I heard the voice of the 40th President of the United States, I joined the Reagan Revolution and I never looked back. I came to the Republican Party because of Ronald Reagan. And I remember when I was roughly the age of many of the students gathered here, marveling as his economic policies defeated inflation. His predecessor, Jimmy Carter, had told us that we were a nation in malaise, that we had to accept a new normal of slow economic growth and high inflation. Reagan came in and said, why not dream great dreams? After all, we're Americans. And they cut taxes, rolled back regulations, promoted economic freedom, and America came roaring back. The longest peacetime expansion since the end of World War II. I marveled at the way his policy of peace through strength broke the Soviet Union eventually and strengthened our military as never before. Now, some Republican candidates for the nomination and the populists in our party maintain that Reagan is no longer relevant. But they confuse inspiration with imitation. You know, over 4 decades have passed since Reagan took office, 3 since he left this earth. The great contests of his time and ours are different. In his day, the Cold War between the old Soviet Union and the United States defined global politics. Now the Cold War is long over. During his presidency, our primary rival today, Communist China, was economically impoverished and militarily unsophisticated. We live in a very different time. Conservatives need not replicate every single Reagan policy or strategy, nor should we. But we can emulate his belief in freedom and economic liberty. We can emulate his willingness to stand up to evil regimes on the world stage and stand alongside the friends of freedom across the world. And we can emulate his dignified and civil way of carrying himself as president to meet today's challenges. Ronald Reagan himself said with regard to his own ideas, quote, "I wasn't a great communicator, but I communicated great things, and they didn't spring full bloom from my brow. They came from the heart of a great nation." The American ideas Ronald Reagan expressed were not his. They were grounded in the American founding, fought for and defended through the long and tumultuous history of American freedom. Leaders pass into history, but first principles endure. The politics of convenience driven by the passing moment, however, are soon to fail and be forgotten. Reagan used beliefs that long predated him to meet the threats of his own times, and so should we. He took inspiration from the likes of Calvin Coolidge and Dwight Eisenhower and the founder of the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln, as he brought America back. The truth is, the Republican Party did not begin on a golden escalator in 2015. Long before that day, it was forged and defended and defined as the conservative party in America, and so it should ever be. I actually met President Ronald Reagan when I was a first-time candidate for Congress. It was his last year in office. I was 29 years old. It would be more than a decade before I would arrive in the Congress of the United States, but I was there along with my young bride for a photo op with the 40th president. And I'll never forget the encounter. I walked into the Blue Room and the president was seated there. The cameras were all clicking. When I told my young wife before, I said, the campaign wanted me to say something political to him, but I wanted to say something from my heart. And Karen did what she always does. She patted me on the arm and just said, just tell him what's on your heart. So I sat down. You can look it up on your phone right now. You can see the picture. I was as nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. I sat down in that chair, looked into the president's eyes, felt for all the world like I was talking to Mount Rushmore. The president said to me, "How's the campaign going?" And I said, "It's going fine, Mr. President, but I got something I'd like to say to you." He said, "Well, go ahead." And I said, "I just want to thank you for everything you've done for this country and everything you've done to restore my generation's confidence in America again. And I'll always believe that in that moment, the 40th President of the United States almost blushed, like he'd never heard it before. And he said, "Well, Mike, that's a very nice thing of you to say." I can almost still hear it. But it was moments later that made the most impression on me. The President walked into the East Room to greet the spouses that were along with the candidates. And apparently some of the candidates had said to him the same thing I had said. They thanked him for what he'd done in 8 years to transform the American economy and had set into motion forces that in just a few short years would bring down Soviet communism and see the Berlin Wall collapsed and destroyed. He stood up at a makeshift podium and he said, "You know, many of you have thanked me for what I did for this country." But then Ronald Reagan said, "I don't think I did anything for this country." He said, "I think the American people just decided to right the ship. And I was just the captain they put on the bridge when they did it." Ronald Reagan believed in the American people. And so do I. I believe that more than anything else at the heart of our party and our movement. Conservatives believe in the American people. We believe in economic freedom and limited government. We trust the American people to guide the course of their own lives. We trust them to know best how to teach their children, how to spend their earnings, to run their businesses. And when we act on their behalf, they trust us to do so through the system created by our founding fathers and defended by every generation that's worn the uniform of the United States. And because we trust the American people, we know we can be honest with you about the threats we face today and the solutions that we need to bring to them. I submit to you, if we abandon that trust and that confidence in the American people, if we cease to be champions of our Constitution and all the principles enshrined in it, our party's relevancy will be confined to the history books. It may live on in some populist fashion, but then it will truly be, in a cruel twist, Republican in name only. For the sake of our party, for the sake of our country, we cannot allow this to happen. If we're to defeat Joe Biden and turn America around, the Republican Party must be the party of limited government, free enterprise, fiscal responsibility, and traditional moral values. And I'll be carrying that message across the Granite State and all across America in the days ahead. So with Labor Day behind us, the campaign for the Republican nomination in full swing, we've come to a Republican time for choosing. Will we embrace the traditional conservative agenda that's led our party and our nation to victory and prosperity now for more than half a century? Or will we choose to go down the path of populism and decline? In the book of Jeremiah, it reads, quote, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." Men and women of New Hampshire, I believe we stand at a crossroads, not only in the life of our nation, but in the life of the Republican Party. But I have faith. I have faith that Republican voters will once again choose the good way, the way of conservative values and limited government that Americans have fought for and defended throughout our history. I believe we will remain the conservative party, but it falls to all of you in this first in the nation state to see to it. But I'm confident. If we renew our faith in our first principles, renew our faith in each other, and keep faith in the author and finisher of our faith and freedom, I know it will always be morning in America. We will restore our party. We will defeat Joe Biden. And we will bring America to greater heights than you could possibly imagine. So let the debate begin over the future of the Republican Party and America. And to my fellow conservatives, let's get to work. Thank you all. God bless you. And God bless America.